It's a great honor for me to be here at the Empire Club of Canada today, which is arguably the most famous and historically relevant speakers podium to have ever existed in Canada. It has offered its podium to such international luminaries as Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Audrey Hepburn, the Dalai Lama, Indira Gandhi, and closer to home, from Pierre Trudeau to Justin Trudeau. Literally generations of our great nation's leaders, alongside with those of the world's top international diplomats, heads of state, and business and thought leaders.
It is a real honor and a distinct privilege to be invited to speak to the Empire Club of Canada, which has been welcoming international diplomats, leaders in business and in science and in politics. When they stand at that podium, they speak not only to the entire country, but they can speak to the entire world.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 117th season of the Empire Club of Canada. My name is Antoinette Tumilo. I'm the president of the Empire Club of Canada and your host for today's virtual event, Confronting Anti-Asian Racism in Canada. I'd like to begin this afternoon with an acknowledgement that the land we are broadcasting from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For those of you tuning in from regions across the country today, we encourage you to learn more about the traditional territory on which you work or live. I want to now take a moment to recognize our sponsors who generously support the Empire Club and make these events possible. Thank you to our lead event sponsor, Hydro One, our supporting sponsor, Grant Thornton, and our season sponsor, Waste Connections of Canada. I would also like to thank the Canadian Bankers Association, who are a supporting sponsor of this event, as well as a season sponsor of the Empire Club. And thank you to our event partner, BBC and livemeeting.ca for webcasting today's event. Now for a few logistical items. First, if you're finding your internet feed is slow, please click the Switch Streams button on the right hand of the screen. And do not hesitate to press the Request for Help button if you are experiencing technical difficulties. Our team will be happy to assist. I want to remind everyone participating that this is an interactive event. Although a recording of this event will be made available, those attending live are encouraged to engage with our speakers today by taking advantage of the question box to the right of your screen. We have allotted some time for Q&A towards the end of the discussion. We also invite you to share your thoughts on social media using our hashtag Empire Club of Canada, which you can also find in the corner of your viewer throughout the event. It is now my pleasure to call this virtual meeting to order. I would now like to introduce Minister Mary Ng. Throughout her 20 years of public service, Minister Ng has been a devoted community leader with a focus on creating jobs, fostering entrepreneurship, and empowering small businesses to innovate and grow. In her capacity as a federal cabinet minister, she continues to help our entrepreneurs and businesses succeed here in Canada and internationally by accessing new markets. First elected the Member of Parliament for Markham Thornhill in April 2017, Minister Ng was first appointed to Cabinet in July 2018 as Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion. After being successfully re-elected in October 2019, she became Canada's Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion, and International Trade, the first woman of color to hold that role. Also joining us today is Eileen Park Robertson, who is founder and filmmaker at Anecdotia Media, a video production agency focused exclusively on racial, social, and climate justice. Most recently, she ran communications at the Office of the Mayor of Portland after more than a decade as an award-winning reporter and TV anchor. 36 hours after 8 people were killed in Atlanta, 6 of them Asian women, news of Eileen's interracial marriage to the longest serving mayor of Vancouver was published. Eileen, a Korean American living in Vancouver, received a torrent of racist, hate-filled, and sexualized messages. It was a moment of truth for Eileen, to speak out or to remain silent. She did, of course, speak out, striking a chord with Asian women everywhere who wrote to her expressing solidarity and hope for dismantling deeply rooted racist biases they haven't been able to speak on. We are broadcasting today during Asian Heritage Month, the theme of which this year is recognition, resilience, and resolve. I will now hand over to Eileen and Minister Ng to reflect on their own experiences, share their perspectives, and discuss how all Canadians can come together to fight anti-Asian racism. Over to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Antoinette, and the Empire Club, and every single person watching right now. It really is a privilege to be invited to facilitate a conversation around confronting anti-Asian racism in Canada with the Honourable Mary Ng. And there is much to get to and unpack here, and not a lot of time, so let's get right to it. Minister Ng, I want to start by beginning to say that it is also my personal honor to be sharing this virtual stage with you. There has never been a more important time for leadership. And I know it is a tremendously difficult time to be in government as we face global economic crises, a pandemic, racialized tensions, and you and your team and your colleagues are right in the middle of it all. And often it is thankless, and often electeds are attacked and hated. And I know the weight of that burden is rarely recognized. So I wanted to begin by thanking you for fighting the good fight and bearing that burden.
Well, Eileen, thank you so much. The privilege is all mine to have an opportunity for you and I to have a conversation, and have a conversation at a time right now during Asian Heritage Month is bittersweet in some respects, because every year this is a time of the year where there are stories, reflections of the past, and really the tone tends to be celebratory. This year, while we are doing that, and we should continue to do that, and it's important to recognize and to do the celebrations, because I think that's important. It's bittersweet because we are in a context and environment right now, as you rightly pointed out, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think these conversations really do elevate they elevate the discussion with a way to engage more people in the conversation, Asian Canadians in particular, with a view of how we might be able to work together as Canadians with allies on what that path forward can and could be for all of us, so that we really do yield the Canada that we all are so proud of. Being diverse, diversity is one thing because we are a diverse country, but inclusive is a choice that we all get to make, including that of our allies. So with our allies together. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And indeed, the pleasure is all mine. And I always think that that the fight is always a collective fight, because, you know, who are we doing this for? We're doing this for Canadians today, and we're certainly doing it for the next generation. So it is my pleasure.
Yeah, and you're right. Asian Heritage Month this year is particularly more poignant in light of all the brutal attacks we've seen verbally and physically against Asian Canadians and Asians really around the world. So let's start off this discussion right here. In light of all of this, what does Asian Heritage Month mean to you personally?
Well, I mean, for me as an Asian Canadian leader, you can't, you sort of wear two hats. One, which is that of a public leader and what you need to do to bring people together and to find those very solutions to the very disturbing trends that we have been seeing and the very disturbing actions that have, that we have seen over the course of this, year and a half, particularly because as COVID has come onto our shores and the incredible rise of anti-Asian racism that we are seeing. And at a personal level, I mean, on the one hand, it is what do we do about it and how do we as government and as leadership tackle this? But at a personal level, I mean, it's me walking out on the street. It is my friends who send me text messages to say that their 70-year-old mother is worried about going out and wondering how to buy and where to buy pepper spray in order to go out for a walk around the neighborhood. It's thinking about those businesses not very different than my own family business. When I was growing up, we had a Chinese food restaurant, so it was front facing, public facing, and how all of those businesses and people are dealing with this rise and what it means at the human level. So you really do think of it from both sides. And then what you try to do is you try to think forward about what it is that we can all do collectively to tackle this together. But I guess the same question will apply to you as well. For you, what has it been like, Eileen, for you in this period? I know that you also have been vocal, and thank you for that. But maybe you can also share with all of us the experience that you have found yourself in as well during this period.
Yeah, I also think of my family. And when I think of the multi-generational impact of invisibility, of silence, and in the absence of representation in the halls of power historically, systemic racism also allowed to proliferate in, for instance, like housing access or education or employment opportunities. I think of my mother, a Korean immigrant, a single mother who, for all her brilliance as a scholar and a doctor, did not stand a chance in deflecting everyday microaggressions and racist prejudice, really, as an Asian woman. And I think of all the other millions of women just like her living under the oppression of being an eternal foreigner. Or I think of the toxic, tragic weight of fetishization, particularly unique to Asian women. Then to see, especially in the last year and a half, the weaponization of COVID, that unexpectedly brought to the fore long-held racist attitudes against us, manifesting in overt hate and repeated verbal and physical violence against Asian people, and it galvanized a historically fractured, diverse community and catalyzed this unprecedented advocacy and unprecedented solidarity with our Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities. So I really do see a new era of serious healing and hope. But for all of my optimism, you're right on the mark. We still have so much work to do on the ground to start exposing the root causes of such hate. And at the most basic level, it begins with the most fundamental ask a human could ask for. And it begins with just stop attacking us. Like, so basic, right? And we've seen a disturbing increase in anti-Asian racism and hate crimes in Canada in the last year. Vancouver, for example, as you know, was just named the Asian hate capital of the world. So here's the next thing I want to ask you. How has all of that impacted your work and impacted you personally?
Well, it's I agree with everything that you have said. I mean, and in that in particular, I think the hope and the optimism is where we need to be. And if I were to think about the energies that I must place to this, it is to acknowledge and recognize what is at the core and what is at the core, but always spending much more time on, on where, on where we can reconcile, on where we can bring communities together, on where we can come up with creative, good strategies to eradicate hate and racism. And you're absolutely right. Seeing racialized communities, indigenous communities, peoples come together in a single effort to fight racism is where that light is. And for me, as a federal minister, you have an opportunity because you have a public-facing job. We have an opportunity as a convener to be able to bring parties together. This is where there has been some really good work that has begun, bringing together the various people, but also those that are in institutions who, whose sole job it is to work to create safe workplaces, to protect Canadians. So I'm talking about including law enforcement as an example. So across the country, Minister Chagger, who's my colleague and responsible for inclusivity and diversity, Minister Blair, who is the public safety minister for the country, we have been meeting with community leaders across the country to hear the challenges, but also some of the opportunities and what we could be doing together, working across jurisdictions between the provincial governments, territorial governments, municipalities, as well as with the federal government, but also with community advocates and leaders and groups. One of the terrific things that have come out, and I don't know if people have had a chance to have a look at it, but those that are in the artist community, the creators, there's been this wonderful poet that has written, that has created a spoken word with great journalists like Melissa Grello and Lainey Louie, and put out a really terrific piece, which is really a broad coalition of work that has come together to speak out against anti-Asian racism and racism of all of its forms. But it really is, how does it affect the work? It affects the work because it gives us an opportunity to really bring people together so that we can actually come up with some solutions. And those solutions include an $11 million investment in the most recent federal budget that will go to invest in community organizations specifically that have been affected by COVID-19, by racism, and how we can begin to address this together, communities and governments alike.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Yeah, Asian hate for me is manifested not only through blatant hate, overt hate, but also covert hate. And so, with Asian Canadians and their complex, beautiful historical stories being woven throughout Canada, and acknowledging that is the first step. And by funding where you put your money is a reflection of where your values are. So thank you, Minister Ng, when you say that we've allocated $11 million to supporting Asian communities around the country. That is symbolic of where the government's priorities are. And I know in a time when there is a significant stretch of resources, and you have to be very decidedly intentional about where you decide that you're going to be engaged in the healing of communities. So, Minister, can you share a little bit more about the government's role in this? And in addition to safety, in addition to funding, like as the front-facing, public-facing person in the country, and specifically to your role in small business and the economics of the country, really. What else can the government do? What else is the government doing that we don't know about?
Yeah, that's terrific. A terrific question. I'm not sure how to answer it, considering there's actually quite a wide array of what is happening. But maybe I'll just sort of focus on small business and international trade. This recent budget really has set us up to finish the fight against COVID-19, and the reason that is so important is because it's been this government's steadfast priority to ensure the health and safety of Canadians, and that Canadians have what they need to finish this, well, to fight COVID-19, and now to finish the fight against COVID-19. And for me, as the small business minister and the international trade minister, we have been steadfastly supporting and committed to growth and inclusive growth. And that means that in our economy and in economic recovery, that recovery has to include everyone in our society. It has to include women entrepreneurs, racialized entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs. And we have really started this work well before the pandemic. And we've seen during the pandemic how women have been particularly impacted. The industries that they are the ones that are the hardest hit, whether it's tourism, or you think about so many of the, the stores on main streets, and in those industries like hospitality and tourism, which are disproportionately, led by women or racialized communities that, that have always had barriers or difficulty accessing things like access to capital to help start their business or to scale their business. So these are measures that our government have been focused on even before COVID-19. And in this recovery, making sure that we are investing like a $30 billion investment so that we can get early learning and childcare. This is going to help bring back the 100,000 women that we have lost as a result of COVID-19 out of the workforce. So in this economic recovery, making sure that they are there, making sure that Black entrepreneurs and racialized entrepreneurs have access to funding to, for their businesses in an equitable way, and bringing down those barriers, supporting Indigenous entrepreneurs in this economic recovery. So what does this mean for, how does it fit in terms of anti-Asian racism? It means that when we can include all in Canada's economic recovery, and then when we start seeing the leaders of today and tomorrow be truly inclusive of so many of us across the Canadian economy, our economic policies actually work hand in hand with our environmental objectives, but also with our building back better the Canadian society as we look towards this recovery, and in that deliberate leadership around inclusiveness will help us and all of our allies fight racism in all of its forms.
Well said. And also what that funding does is it starts unraveling the systemic racism that has really plagued communities of color. Specifically, when you talk about investing billions into businesses that also will affect the businesses run by people of color, particularly, that, systemic racism is the deeply rooted disadvantage that people of color face within employment, within business, within getting loans, for instance. And education, that's incredible that we're going to start seeing the fruits of that for generations to come. This is happening now. And the women who are able to work because they have healthcare and childcare and et cetera, and are able to change generationally their future, their children's future and their children's children's future. So that's extraordinary. I thank you for that. Which leads me to the next topic. I'm curious to know what motivated you specifically to run for politics, and what has the experience been like for you as a racialized woman?
Well, thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to asking you the same question about you in journalism too. But for me, I think in many ways, I've been in politics for a very long time, even before putting up a sign that had my name on it to run for office, sort of in a much more public way. I mean, to me, politics is about people, and it's about what we can be doing as government in order to shape our policies that will ultimately, help Canadians, and whether it's Canadian families or young people, seniors, or Canadian small businesses. But for me, I didn't really see a whole lot of people who look like me in politics. And I really do believe that you have to see her to be her. And I think that if I look around the families and the communities in my riding, I represent a riding called Morecambe Thornhill. It's just it's part of the Greater Toronto area. My riding is incredibly diverse with families from literally all over the world, but predominantly Asian, South Asian, and also multi-faith. And when I knock on doors and talk to those families or those Canadians about what's important to them, and that what is important to them get reflected in what we do as a government, that is being representative. That is being able to have a seat at the table. And I'm very fortunate that I have a seat at the table, not only as a member of parliament because I'm elected by the people, but I have a seat around the cabinet table with a prime minister who has my back always, who has a gender parity cabinet. We are diverse. So our perspective that we bring to the decision-making table comes from a lived experience. And I think that lived experience is the experience of so many Canadians across the country. And I think that to see her is to be her. And I hope that the next generation and then the next generation of Canadian women will see this as a very, very viable path for them to contribute to their country. So it really is a deep honor to be able to do what I do. And so primarily that was the reason to add a voice that I thought could contribute to our country. But Eileen, you have been trailblazing in journalism, and you too. We don't see a lot of faces like yours either. So why don't you share with us your experience and your journey as an award-winning journalist, doing, sort of playing a leadership role in doing what you do?
Well, I was mesmerized really at the power of storytelling. And as a young, scrawny girl from Fort Lee, New Jersey, you are compelled by, these stories that are so much bigger than yourself. And that to me was what journalism was. I saw Connie Chung and Christiane Amanpour and Diane Sawyer reflected on the screen. And these women were just so extraordinary and elegant, but also in your face. And they were just they weren't a monolith. They didn't fit any mold. And that's what I wanted for myself, because I felt like I had multitudes within me and I needed to express that somehow. And I believe that the institution of journalism, the core tenets of journalism, to hold the powerful accountable, but also to tell stories all over the world from communities that are underrepresented, all of those things factored into why I became a journalist. And you are absolutely right. I had that planted in my head as a little girl because I saw other women doing it. And I saw women like me, there weren't many, to your point. Connie Chung was pretty much it, and then Lisa Ling, but they paved that path. They broke so much ground, and I don't think people realize by breaking that ground the how difficult that is, and the amount of unspoken trauma experienced by people, and especially you, Minister, who are literally creating new pathways. And that is hard, and it is messy, and it's often lonely, really. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that for a moment, to say these incredible pioneers who are on the forefront of this, who have allowed us, women like me, to be able to be in the position I am now is pretty extraordinary. And I wish we were much further along than we are now, but here we are. So we got to do the best we can with where we are right now. So to wrap this up, Minister, I want to end with this final question for you before we jump into the Q&A. As the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion, and International Trade, how does, and you kind of spoke on this before, but how does being a woman of color really inform that work?
Well, You're right. I mean, I touched on it just really quickly, which is your lived experiences help you. It shapes an understanding. It shapes a perspective, and some of the work that I did before coming into politics was also working with young people and working with some of our most innovative and entrepreneurial startups in Canada, and here as the international trade minister, I have the privilege of doing my work as Canada in the global environment. So what does that really mean? It means that Canada has, is the only country that is a G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We are pursuing opportunities because we have trade agreements with places like Europe, but also in the Asia Pacific through the CPTPP. So really great trade agreement that covers countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. But what does it mean sort of, for me as an international trade minister? It means being able to create those pathways, leveraging on what the strength of Canada is in our diversity to actually help our businesses not only start up and scale up here in Canada, but to access those new markets. I always say my job is the Minister of Startup, Scale Up, Access New Markets, so that we can, and I tell businesses and entrepreneurs about this all the time. I do believe that we have an advantage. I believe that Canada has an advantage because of our incredible diversity, and to be able to leverage that diversity into the international markets, because we are terrific at trading with the world because we come from around the world. So these incredible businesses that are here, and the way that government doesn't do the business, but we certainly set the table. We set the table and we invite others in, and by setting that table that includes opportunities around the world to like over 65% of the world's economy, and by bringing businesses in and gearing our government resources in a way that supports our businesses, from the littlest of businesses to the large businesses, to really pursue those opportunities in international trade and around the world. I think I have a bit of advantage just also because of the outlook that I bring from being a racialized woman, about the opportunities that exist beyond Canada's borders, and the aspirations that holds for Canada, and that I very much, am in a coveted space to create those bridges to those markets for our Canadian companies.
Awesome. That was a great way to end our forum portion of the hour. And now we're going to start taking some questions from our audience. And we have one already lined up. So here we go. So given the long existing color-coded and other labor market inequities across Canada, with the current global focus on anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, and anti-Asian racisms, one of the most powerful tools for long-term equity, fairness, and sustainability is strong. I just lost my place. Is strong employment equity legislation. Employment equity legislation. As we flow billions of infrastructure investments to build back better, why is the government not using existing policy framework to build a more fair, equitable, and resilient economy for Indigenous peoples, Asian Canadians, other peoples of color, and other equity-seeking groups? Minister.
Okay, so let me see. So as it relates to employment equity, absolutely, we are not only committed to it, we've actually put forward, I think it was in our first mandate, legislation towards that. But what I would also say is that that the investments that we are making, particularly coming out of this budget, that really is about investing in building back better. I already talked about the need to ensure that women are very much a part of the economy as we are recovering, but in infrastructure, as an example, the enormous investments that we are going to be making into communities all across Canada are going to be building the necessary infrastructure that we're going to need across the country, but it's also going to be more green. And in my colleague in Minister Anand, who is responsible, you hear her a lot in media because she's in there every day around how she is procuring successfully vaccines for Canadians. But she's also the minister responsible for public procurement. And there we have created opportunities so that some of the government's procurement itself is going to provide some preferential opportunities for racialized businesses. The work that we're doing around women entrepreneurs and the investments for Indigenous entrepreneurs is very, very deliberately focused on leading intentionally so that we are building capacity for racialized LGBTQ2, Indigenous women entrepreneurs so that they have, so that not only are we building capacity, but removing those very barriers that would stand in the way of succeeding. So I would say that all of our policies of this government have always been focused on inclusive growth, and that is no different in the investments that we are making now and in building back better. It is building back better and building back greener.
Well said. Okay, next question. This is from, I hope I'm saying this name right, but Paik Rowan. Hi, Minister Ng. I am a new racial justice liaison for Unifor for Ontario. It is such a great honor to hear an Asian woman leader like yourself talk. As you mentioned, you have to face the public all the time. How do you deal with hecklers, racist people who have decided that you are not the one they want to be in that role? And no matter how much you're qualified for doing the job because of your race and gender, thank you. I have so much to learn from your courage and experience.
Well, I think first, you stand up and you call out hate and you call out racism. You have to stand up and you have to say that it is not acceptable. I have done that. The Prime Minister has done that. My colleagues, which when we started this conversation, Eileen, I'm sorry, I think there are several of my MP colleagues who are here in the audience, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, a shout out, hi, welcome, thank you for joining, but also to this point, it is my colleagues and I who will steadfastly stand up and call it out. And then the other thing is that we are in privilege by being in government, by putting forward the policies that I've already talked about, the investments that we are deliberate at making, and to serve all Canadians, no question. But you do a job, and you do a good job, and you can't worry about the naysayers. What you need to do is you need to worry about the Canadians whom you are serving. And we're here with a deliberate job to do, but you do need to call it out, and I call on allies to do that as well. And we all have voices, and we can all do something about this. One really terrific story here is, in one of the roundtables I was doing across the country, a mom asked me, a suburban mom, and she said, I don't know, I want to help, but how do I do that? I said, well, let me share a statistic that came out in one of these studies that happened over the course of the year, that over 50% of Asian parents are worried that their children are going to be bullied, and they're very worried for their safety. I said, as a mom, imagine that was your child. What could you do?
Yeah.
You can help your child. You can teach. You have something, so everyone has something that they could be doing. And I don't believe that we can fight this ourselves. I totally believe that it's going to take all of us and like-minded, all Canadians who will stand up for each other, because we can do better. And I am convinced that that by doing it together, we will absolutely make a difference, despite the challenges.
Yeah, and I think we're entering into a new era of believing that our voices finally are acknowledged and they matter, and our allies are stepping up, and it is extraordinary, but we need more, definitely. Okay. The next question is from Vivian. How do we create more opportunities for Asian and BIPOC leaders to be seen and heard as leaders in business, boards, and politics?
Well, here in politics, I would encourage everyone who wishes to get involved. I mean, and it isn't about running for public office. There's many, many things that you could do. Volunteering that isn't that doesn't include you running for public office. You can support, a leader that you believe in, and so in politics, I would encourage get involved. I mean, the way to solve all of this is actually by more participation and not less. And don't let that noise get in your way of discouraging you from participating. Participate. And then around corporate boards and in business, I mean, our government put forward something that's called the 50-30 challenge. And this is about gender parity on boards and greater representation on boards and on senior management all across the country. So having 30% representation in those boards. And I am very encouraged. This again is around intentional leadership. Having the 50-30 challenge is something that our government put forward. It's encouraging to see organizations ranging from the YMCA to Deloitte or the Chambers of Commerce and to many organizations in corporate Canada starting to make those decisions, to look at representation and to be deliberate at including those diverse voices and to make the senior management, to work towards senior management and members in their boards truly be more representative than it has been.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And, there is that encouragement, right? You can say to the biggest companies in Canada and say, diversify your boards, but then there's the accountability element to it. A lot of the rebuttal that we're seeing is that we can't find enough qualified women of color, but that's not true because we see that the same amount of qualifications that other men in particular have on these boards it's just this perceived notion of who is credible, who is not. And so dismantling that and tackling your own implicit racial biases or sexist biases or you name it, it begins with that and acknowledging and lifting up a new generation of people who have never had that access before. So I love the 50-30 initiative. That's great.
Well, on that, let me pick up on the women entrepreneurship strategy because, and this speaks to deliberate leadership in this regard. I mean, in my mandate from the Prime Minister, I have to double the number of female entrepreneurs in our country. And here are just sort of, some stats for you. I mean, Canada's small businesses are 98% of Canadian businesses all across the country. Only 16% are women-owned or women-led. So it's less than a quarter, right? I mean, and yet the return on that investment is $150 billion to the Canadian economy by doing one thing. Add women to the Canadian economy. And if I take a look at, I often also I often say, look, there is an absolute return on investment and here's what it is. And so therefore we can do better. But I also throw this other sort of factoid out there, which causes people to sort of pause. When a woman makes a pitch to get access to capital, she is successful about 30% of the time. If a man makes that same pitch word for word for pitching for capital, the man is successful 62% of the time. And on the Forbes top 100 list of CEOs, I think that this might be 2019, there were more men by the name James than there were women leaders. So it does show the, Eileen, to your point, that the inequity that is there, but what it doesn't recognize is the return on investment that also is there. So it actually is intentional leadership around representation. But the other part of it is really about it's it's a smart decision. It's a smart economic decision. So, you know, I get to lead Canada's first ever women's entrepreneurship strategy. And it's about a $5 billion investment to grow the number of female entrepreneurs, to make sure that they get supported, to create the ecosystems of support. But we're doing it because it's not only the right thing to do, because it's smart economic strategy for Canada to be doing that. And in this latest budget, I mean, shout out to the Deputy Prime Minister and the first female Prime Minister, first Finance Minister that's female in our country. But she added $147 million to the women's entrepreneurship strategy so that we can keep doing this very important work, because it's so critically important to the economic recovery of the country.
Yeah, and so unacknowledged for so long. So well said. We're not just asking for representation for the sake of representation. We're asking for it because we are actually really good at what we do.
Yes.
Okay, next question. We were getting a lot of questions, Minister. This one is from Suzanne. What is the way forward, i.e. crucial strategies to combat anti-Asian hate in Canada?
I think that the work that the anti-Asian, the anti-racism secretariat that is, you know, that my colleague Minister Chagger leads, is doing some really, really important work there. It is a dedicated focus on working across the country with partners and communities, specifically to combat racism in all of its forms. One of the things that she has been also doing is working with Statistics Canada, as an example, to make sure that something so important like data and collecting disaggregated data is being done. It's really important. I mean, when we sort of talk about government policy and decision making, it's really important, and we certainly are a government that believes that both evidence-based decision making is good. Scientific expertise is what helps us make, you know, good decisions. So the anti-racism secretariat work that Minister Chagger has been leading has been so instrumental, and working across the country with communities, enabling communities, diverse communities, to have the capacity, and by supporting and by investing in that, is also elevating those voices, but also helping to enable those voices be a part of the public policy dialogue, which is also so important. I mean, government and our institutions, to respond to people, have to be able to work with Canadians, and we've got to be able to do that across the country and in the range of diverse communities that make our fabric just so strong. So that, you know, that there are many things that go into combating this, but that certainly is one that comes to mind.
Well said. Yeah, in my experience, I believe that people were caught off guard when I started calling them out specifically on either social media platforms or via email. You know, they lodge their hate, right? And these are people who have no problems hiding their racism, right? They are ready to tell you that there is no racism in Canada. You are lying, you're an opportunist, you name it. They've said it to me, and I'm sure they've said it to you. And what surprises everyone that I respond to is they weren't expecting a response from me. And so once I did it and we started having a dialogue, that's when awareness started creeping in. And I do believe that's also part of why it's been so extraordinary in the last year and a half to see so much awareness around anti-Asian hate, because people didn't know. It was always swept under the rug. And now it's brought to the fore, and it's done in a very public way. And they're seeing their own grandmothers being assaulted and attacked, and grandfathers. And that hits an emotional nerve and so it's starting to shift. Perceptions are starting to shift. Biases against people of color, period, are starting to shift. And I think it's extraordinary. We just need to start elevating it and making it more of a mass thing.
We also have to create forums like this one, and I'm so thrilled at the work that you're doing too, Eileen, with others, because we have to make it comfortable for people to have a conversation from Asian communities.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about me or my peers, or growing up. I mean, what did my parents teach me, right? I mean, keep your head down, work hard, and don't talk about those uncomfortable things. Just keep your head down and work hard. And I think that of late, what these conversations they've been so important because they've enabled the conversations to begin to happen. And yes, there is more to be done, but I think that these conversations, as uncomfortable as they may be, are very good to have. And I have a lot of gratitude to have the opportunity to speak publicly about this as a way of being able to create an environment that's safe. And I hope that even in the discomfort, it allows other voices to just continue and then to be amplified, so that we can really, get to a healthy dialogue. And the healthy dialogue allows us to address some uncomfortable things, but it then sort of puts us on a path, I hope, to some solutions down the road.
Yeah, agree. Okay, this one is more of a comment. Chris Goen said, "Thank you both for your work. You inspire us. I hope your work will be embraced by others here in the US, where it is desperately needed." And I believe that's all the time you really have for. If there's something else that you want to talk about, Minister, that you feel like you didn't get into before we wrap up.
On that one, Chris, I mean, it's very apropos because I will be leaving you and then having my next meeting with Ambassador Catherine Tai, who is the U.S. Trade Representative for the U.S. And then later this afternoon, I will be speaking to my Mexican Trade Secretary counterpart and in Secretary Cloutier. And here we have both Canada, well, all three, Canada, US, and Mexico at the leadership in the trade file of women and racialized women. So it is very encouraging, and I am very much looking forward to that. And that just sort of, it was sort of apropos that that was the last comment, because that is what my afternoon is going to be.
That's awesome. Okay, Antoinette.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Minister Ng, for sharing your experiences and perspectives. I'm sure our audience would agree this has been an incredibly insightful conversation where we can all take a step back and reflect how we each as individuals can be mindful of our own behavior and self-awareness of anti-Asian issues to help promote societal changes. It is an important conversation to keep front and center now more than ever. Thank you again for your honesty and openness today. I would now like to introduce Daniel Levitan, Vice President, Stakeholder Relations at Ontario Hydro One, our lead sponsor for this event.
Thank you very much, Antoinette. And on behalf of Hydro One, I want to start by thanking the Empire Club, Minister Ng and Eileen for their leadership in shining a light on and speaking out against anti-Asian racism, along with what can be done to fight it. It's a very, very important conversation that we've had today. And I think it's conversations like today that make it such an easy decision for us to be a proud sponsor of the work that the Empire Club does. Hydro One's proud to be one of Canada's most equitable, diverse, and inclusive employers at all levels of the company we have, and continue to make thoughtful actions to continue and improve upon that reputation. And events like today's play a really, really important role in that. One of the ways we've done this as a company has been through launching a Diversity and Inclusion Council that comprises leaders from across our company, has a mandate to advocate for and drive change throughout the entire organization on diversity and inclusion programming, but more specific, looking at real opportunities for change. Minister Ng has, for example, appropriately highlighted procurement policies and the labor market as key areas of opportunity where businesses should be looking at, and that's obviously something to really keep in mind. This is such an important discussion and perspective for us to bring back to our own businesses, but also as individuals, to our friends and families, and in our everyday life. I have no doubt that feeling is multiplied by the number of people and organizations represented here today. And you know, if you pull back and contemplate that for a moment, that's a really large impact for one lunch event, and that's pretty cool. So, you know, with that, I just want to thank Eileen and Minister Ng for sharing an earnest and open perspective today, and of course for everyone in attendance and the Empire Club for making it happen. So, with that, thank you and be safe, and I'll pass it back to Antoinette.
Thanks, Daniel. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this important discussion. Before closing, I'd like to just tell you about our next event taking place on May 27th at noon, Fuel for Thought, a collaboration between the Canadian Fuels Association and the Empire Club of Canada. Our first session is about getting to net zero, the role of Canada's transportation fuels sector, promises to inform and educate. Registration is complimentary. On the Empire Club's website, empireclub.org, and we hope to see you there. This meeting is now adjourned.